I funded my entire family until they accidentally sent me a video that changed everything, and then I used to think life was supposed to feel harder when you finally got what you wanted, like the reward for success came with more struggle, more stress, more weight on your back. But that wasn't true for me, at least not at first. At 39, I was finally exactly where I'd spent nearly 2 decades climbing toward, standing at the top floor of Monroe Capital's downtown office tower, managing portfolios that moved seven-figure sums every quarter, fielding client calls from people whose names regularly appeared in business magazines I used to read during lunch breaks. When I landed my last promotion, Director of Strategic Development, it came with a raise, a private office with lake views, and a quiet understanding that I'd officially made it, whatever it was supposed to mean. I celebrated that milestone the way I imagined someone would if they didn't have time for celebrations, just enough indulgence to mark the moment, but not enough to derail my routine. I bought myself a lakefront apartment in Chicago's North Harbor district, glass walls on every side, minimal furniture, a kitchen that gleamed with surfaces I barely used, and the kind of silence that made my shoulders relax the second I stepped through the door. A month later, I leased a gunmetal Jaguar coupe, not for attention, not to show off, but because it was the first thing in years I bought just because it made me happy. That's what success meant to me. Calm, control, the ability to say yes to things I actually wanted, not just things I needed. It wasn't until my third or fourth family dinner that I noticed the shift, not in me, but in the way my family started looking at me. My dad, Carl, was 68 and retired early after 2 knee surgeries made construction work impossible. He'd been a quiet force my entire life, dependable but proud, the kind of man who fixed things himself even when he shouldn't. One night after dinner, while Mom was clearing plates, he leaned in with that careful hesitation he used when trying to sound casual. "Lena, I hate to ask, but we're falling behind on the house. The rates went up again, and my disability checks barely stretch past groceries." I didn't think twice. I set up a transfer that same night. Their mortgage wasn't huge, around $2,400 a month, but it was enough to ease the panic from his face the next time I saw him. Then there was Brielle. My little sister had always lived like money would work itself out eventually. She was 31, impossibly talented, with a degree in visual arts and a part-time gig designing web banners and logos for local businesses that paid just enough to cover her half of a loft she shared with her boyfriend Nate in an overpriced part of the city. She wasn't irresponsible, just chronically underpaid, always chasing the next freelance contract like it might finally stabilize things. "Lena, I hate to bring this up," she said over iced lattes one afternoon, "but Nate and I are struggling. We love the place, it's finally home, but we're falling short every month. I don't know what to do." And again, I said yes. I told her I'd cover it until they got things sorted. $1, $800 a month wired directly to their landlord without even a reminder. It didn't feel like sacrifice, not at first. I had the income, I had the savings, and more than that, I had the confidence that it wouldn't break me. I didn't see it as a burden. I saw it as gratitude, repayment for every scraped-together field trip fee or late-night ride from college my parents had pulled off years ago without asking for thanks. Weekdays were for conference rooms, contract negotiations, and quarterly projections. Weekends were for errands, sleep, and long runs along the lake trail when the weather held. Every other Sunday, I drove out to the suburb I'd grown up in for family dinners that hadn't changed since I was a teenager. My mom's lemon chicken or garlic pot roast, Brielle bringing half-finished digital mock-ups to show off on her tablet, and Dad grumbling about the next-door neighbor's hedges. I liked the routine. I liked the normal. I liked knowing that even with all the stress my job brought, I could come back to this rhythm and feel like the world made sense. That all changed because of a trip I almost didn't take. The Panama vacation wasn't planned. It was booked in a haze of late nights and endless phone calls during a brutal acquisition I'd been leading for over 3 months. My sleep was wrecked, my fuse was short, and my assistant handed me a travel brochure like it was a prescription. I found a resort near the coast, quiet, not touristy, the kind of place with hammocks and no-cell towers, and clicked book without thinking. 2 weeks. No email. No Wi-Fi. Just time. It was exactly what I needed. My second night there, I found myself at the open-air bar overlooking the ocean, nursing a drink that was probably more rum than juice, wondering if I even remembered how to relax. That's when he sat down. He was tall, probably mid-40s, with thick hands, worn hiking boots, and gray streaks at his temples that made him look rugged, not old. "This seat taken?" he asked, not pushy, just curious. I shook my head, said it was all his, and smiled without thinking. His name was Cole. He worked in sustainable infrastructure, which sounded fake until he explained he was building clean water systems in rural Idaho, and suddenly I felt like a cliché. A finance exec meeting an earth-saving stranger in a beachfront bar. But it didn't feel fake. Not the 3 drinks that turned into 5. Not the barefoot walk on the beach under a sky full of stars. Not the way I laughed more in a single night than I had in 6 months. Over the next week and a half, we became something soft and temporary, sharing breakfasts, hiking up waterfalls, falling asleep tangled on my patio chair without making any plans beyond breakfast. We didn't trade last names. We didn't talk about the future. It was honest in a way that scared me, because nothing in my life had been temporary in years, and somehow, I didn't want this to last. When we parted ways at the airport, I felt lighter than I had in months. He kissed my cheek, smiled with that same calm expression I'd grown used to, and said, "Thanks for the escape." I flew home with a tan, an open mind, and a return to inboxes that had tripled while I was gone. I didn't tell anyone about Cole, not because I was ashamed, but because it didn't feel real once I was back in the office, back in my black heels and spreadsheets and 3-hour meetings. That version of me, the barefoot, beach hair version, was a visitor. This was the life I knew. But then 3 weeks passed, and I started waking up feeling like I'd swallowed seawater. I blamed stress. I blamed takeout. I blamed poor sleep. Until one afternoon, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd had my period. And just like that, the ground shifted. The pregnancy test turned positive so quickly, it almost felt like a magic trick, 2 pink lines appearing before I could even put the cap back on. I stood in my bathroom for what felt like hours, staring at it, holding it like it might explain itself if I looked hard enough. I bought another test that night from a different store, one town over, as if the brand might somehow change the truth. The next morning, I saw the same lines. I wasn't late because of work stress, or bad sleep, or travel fatigue. I was pregnant, and I was pregnant by a man whose last name I hadn't even bothered to ask. There's a strange sort of stillness that comes with realizing your life just split into 2 possible paths. I sat on the edge of my bed, watching the morning light stretch across the hardwood floor of my very expensive, very organized apartment, and felt every certainty I'd built for myself begin to tilt. The version of me who had a perfect 5-year plan, the one who owned a customized maternity leave policy in her HR folder just in case she ever needed it. She didn't exist anymore. Instead, I had to figure out whether I wanted to pretend this never happened or walk straight into the unknown. My first instinct was to fix it, quietly, surgically, without emotion. I could book an appointment, handle it, and return to work without missing a step. But something about the thought made me nauseous in a way that had nothing to do with hormones. I tried to imagine myself a year from now, sitting in this same apartment, sipping wine alone on my balcony, and wondering what it would have been like to keep the baby. I had the money, I had the space, I even had the paid leave. The only thing I didn't have was a partner, and maybe, for once, that didn't matter. I spent the next few days floating through work like I was trapped in someone else's body. I nodded through meetings, forgot to send 2 follow-up emails, and almost burst into tears when Richard asked if I was feeling okay. When Sunday rolled around, I drove to my parents' house with one hand gripping the wheel and the other resting on my still flat stomach like I was shielding it from their opinions. I knew what I was going to say. I rehearsed it in the car like a speech. I'm 39, I'm stable, and I've made my decision. But the second I walked into their house and smelled roast chicken, everything in me began to tighten. We made it through dinner. I barely touched my food, nodding along to updates about my aunt's knee surgery and Brielle's latest, almost big break with a clothing brand. When dessert came out, I took a deep breath, sat up straight, and said it out loud. I'm pregnant. Almost 8 weeks. The room went silent so fast. I actually heard the clock ticking. My mom set down the pie knife like it was dangerous. My dad blinked like I'd spoken another language. Brielle stared at me like I'd confessed to a crime. The father? Brielle asked, her voice sharp, eyes narrowed like she already knew there'd be no answer that would make her happy. His name was Cole, I said slowly. We met on vacation. It wasn't planned. We didn't keep in touch. I expected them to at least ask how I was feeling or if I needed anything. But the questions were colder. My dad shook his head and muttered something about women making reckless choices. My mother asked if I'd thought about the risk of having a baby at my age. Brielle said, So you're really doing this alone? You realize how hard that's going to be, right? I tried to hold my ground. I reminded them that I had the resources, that this was my choice, that I wasn't asking for anything except maybe a little bit of support. But their faces didn't soften. My mom said I was acting emotionally. My dad asked if I'd even considered the baby's medical background. What if the father had something genetic? Brielle actually suggested I was being selfish for bringing a child into the world just because I wanted one. It wasn't the reaction I expected. It was worse, colder, and deeply disappointing. I stood up, told them I wasn't going to debate my decision, and that if they couldn't be supportive, they'd need to keep their distance. I left the pie untouched, the conversation unfinished, and drove home with one hand gripping the wheel harder than necessary, just to keep it steady. That night, I cried for the first time since the test turned positive, not because I doubted myself, but because I hadn't realized how fragile my connection to my family really was until they broke it without hesitation. The next morning, my mother called. Her voice was softer, measured. We overreacted, she said. We were surprised, that's all. We just want what's best for you. I almost hung up, but didn't. I said I appreciated the call. She asked if I was coming to dinner next week. I said yes, but I meant maybe. Something in me had shifted, and I wasn't sure I could shift it back. The nausea got worse. Not just in the mornings, but mid-meeting, mid-phone call, mid-bite of something I used to love. I started carrying peppermints in my purse and stashing crackers in every drawer of my office. After 2 weeks of pushing through, Richard asked me to stop by his office after a client review. He didn't mince words. You're off your game, he said. If something's going on, now's the time to tell me. I hadn't planned on telling anyone at work yet, but the concern in his eyes caught me off guard. I told him everything, not the vacation details, but the core truth. His reaction surprised me. Take time, he said. Whatever you need. This place will survive without you for a few months. I protested at first, said I couldn't leave mid-quarter, that I was managing 3 key accounts. He waved it off like it was already decided. I went home that afternoon, called HR the next morning, and filed for early medical leave. I told myself it was just for a few weeks. Mom and Brielle visited during those first slow, nauseous days at home. They brought soup and flowers and a list of suggestions I never asked for. You sure you want to go through with this? My mom asked, not unkindly, but still not really listening. Brielle made snide comments about how expensive babies were and asked if I planned to keep paying her rent during maternity leave. I told her yes, for now, and watched her shoulders relax like money was the only thing that mattered. One afternoon, as Mom was arranging tea in my kitchen, she gently brought up the mortgage again. Just for next month, she said. We're running tight. I reassured her, told her everything was still covered. She hugged me like I'd saved her life. That night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, wondering if her concern was really for me, or just the money I gave them. By the time the second trimester started, the nausea had dulled, but the fatigue was worse. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. My back ached, my feet swelled, and my doctor kept warning me about elevated blood pressure. I tried not to let the loneliness get to me. Every time I saw the blurry shape on the ultrasound, every time I felt the flutter of movement below my ribs, I reminded myself that this child was mine, not by accident, not by mistake, but by choice. 20 weeks in, I found out I was having a boy. I brought Brielle with me to the scan because I thought maybe it would help her feel closer to the idea. She sat quietly through the appointment, barely reacting when I asked if she could see the tiny fingers stretching on the screen. That's great, she said. then immediately pivoted to ask if I'd figured out how long I'd be on leave. I told her 12 weeks, with a remote schedule after that. And yes, I'd still cover her rent. It was becoming harder to pretend, harder to ignore that their concern never quite reached my stomach, or the swelling in my legs, or the fact that no one asked how I was feeling unless it directly related to money. I started to wonder what they'd do if I stopped paying. But I didn't stop. Not yet. Instead, I painted the nursery a soft slate blue, ordered a white crib with hidden drawers for storage, and positioned a rocking chair beside the window where the sunlight hit just right around 4 in the afternoon. Some nights, I'd sit in that chair with my hand on my belly and whisper promises to a little boy who had no idea how much was waiting for him. You and me, I'd say. That's all we need. My son arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in mid-April, almost 2 weeks earlier than expected, and somehow right on time. I had been answering work emails in pajama pants when I felt the sudden rush of water, the kind that doesn't leave room for confusion. I called an Uber with shaky hands and packed my hospital bag in a fog, my mind racing through all the logistics I still hadn't finalized. In the back seat, I texted my mom, then my sister, then tried to focus on breathing through what I now knew were very real contractions. By the time I got checked in, I was already dilated 4 centimeters and terrified. Labor was exactly as terrible as everyone says it is, and then some. 16 hours of relentless pressure, unpredictable monitors, nurses asking questions I couldn't answer between gritted teeth, and an epidural that only halfway worked. There was no one in the room but me and a nurse named Julie who held my hand when things got too loud in my head. My family stayed in the waiting room, sending the occasional text but never offering to come in or ask if I wanted them there. Maybe they thought I preferred to be alone. Maybe they just didn't want to see me like that. When my son finally came out, red, slippery, and screaming like a tiny banshee, I was too exhausted to cry. But when the nurse laid him on my chest, his heartbeat frantic against mine, something inside me cracked open in a way I didn't know it could. I named him Milo, middle name Asher, not for any symbolic reason, but because they were the only names that didn't feel borrowed from someone else's story. He weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces, and had a tiny birthmark behind his left knee that looked like a teardrop. He was perfect. He was mine. My mother came in first, peeking her head around the curtain like she wasn't sure she belonged there. She held Milo for maybe 3 minutes before handing him back, saying he looked like me and asking when I'd be discharged. My father stood a few feet away, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable, like being near a newborn might somehow break him. Brielle took a photo for Instagram, meet my nephew Blueheart, then immediately complained about the parking meter running out. They left less than 20 minutes later, citing traffic, a dog to feed, and an early morning meeting. I didn't cry when they left. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why they didn't want to stay longer. I just held Milo closer and whispered promises into his hair, that we would figure it out together, that I would make this life good for him, even if we had to do it alone, that he would always have someone who chose him, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because there was never another option in my heart. The first few weeks were brutal in a way no parenting book had truly prepared me for. Sleep was a luxury I forgot how to miss. My body still ached in places I thought would heal faster. Milo had colic and hated every bottle I tried, crying until his tiny lungs gave out, and he collapsed into twitchy, hiccuping sleep. I lost track of time constantly. Meals became snacks eaten over the sink. My hair stayed in the same bun for 6 straight days once. I loved him so fiercely that it scared me, but I also started to understand why some people cracked under the weight of it. My mom came over twice a week with bags of groceries and unsolicited advice. She always had a reason she couldn't stay long. One day it was her arthritis flaring up, the next it was a dentist appointment or her book club's wine night. She never offered to hold Milo so I could shower, never once asked if I was sleeping or eating. Her focus stayed on appearances, how I looked pale, how I'd lost too much weight, how I should have taken better care of myself during pregnancy if I wanted easier recovery. Brielle called every now and then, usually when rent was due, and asked how the baby was before immediately pivoting to wedding talk. She and Nate were planning a summer ceremony at a pricey event space near the river, and every time we spoke, she dropped new numbers into the conversation like I was a spreadsheet waiting for her budget request. One day she showed up unannounced while Milo was napping, holding a thick wedding planning binder and wearing that fake sweet smile she always used when she wanted something. "Lena, I know this is awkward," she said, not looking the least bit awkward, "but we're in a bit of a tight spot. The venue's more than we thought, 75 grand, all in. And we were hoping, maybe, that you could help us cover some of it. Just a piece. Nothing crazy." I stared at her like she had sprouted wings and flown in through the ceiling. "Brielle, I have a child. I have childcare costs, diapers, medical bills. I'm not bankrolling a luxury wedding." She didn't even try to argue. She just stood, grabbed her purse, and mumbled something about talking to Nate. She barely looked at Milo when she left. Didn't say goodbye. After that, the distance grew faster than I expected. My calls went unanswered. Group texts suddenly excluded me. I found out about a family dinner through Brielle's Instagram story. Cheers in G wine glasses and captioning it, "Nothing like family." When I texted my mom to ask if there had been a mistake, she replied hours later, saying it was just a small gathering and she didn't think I'd want to bring Milo out so late. It was a lie. Every family dinner we ever had was at 6. Always had been. What she meant was that I wasn't welcome anymore. Not really. That night, after putting Milo to bed, I sat on the couch and tried to convince myself this was temporary. That they'd come around. That I just needed to give them time. That blood meant something. But a week later, I got a video from Brielle by mistake. One that wasn't meant for me. I opened it expecting a wedding update. Instead, I watched my family, wine-drunk and careless, laughing around my parents' dinner table, toasting to each other while dragging my name through the dirt. "She's not even the same person," my dad said, half a glass in. "Used to be generous. Now it's all about that baby." Brielle chimed in, 30,000. That's all she offered me. Like she's broke or something. "It's all about Milo this, Milo that." My mom laughed and said, if she had just listened to us and gotten rid of it, none of this would be happening. They all raised their glasses to life before the baby. The video ended there, but the damage was done. I sat there, stunned, Milo asleep in the next room, his tiny body wrapped in the blanket my mother had knitted for him before she changed her mind about loving him. I saved the video before Brielle could delete it, which she did 5 minutes later, after realizing her mistake. She never apologized. Just called me the next morning, voice sugary sweet, asking if I'd made a decision about the money. I told her not to worry, I'd handle it. And I did. That afternoon, I opened my banking app and began erasing every thread that tied me to them. I canceled the automatic mortgage payment for my parents' house. I deleted the utility bill transfers. I stopped the rent payments that had been propping Brielle up for over a year. No announcement. No explanation. Just silence. A week passed before they noticed. Then the call started. First from my mom, panicked, saying the mortgage company had called. Then my dad, furious. Then Brielle, alternating between begging and demanding. When I didn't respond, they came to my door. All 3 of them, faces drawn and angry, as if I'd betrayed them instead of finally choosing myself. I let them in. I played the video. And I waited. They tried to explain it away. Whine. Stress. Jokes. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, "You called my son a burden. You toasted to his absence. And now you want me to keep supporting you." My mother said they were my family. My father said I was being cruel. Brielle called me selfish. I said no, I'm done. And I won't raise Milo to believe that love means obligation. They left. The door slammed behind them. And for the first time in years, my home was truly quiet. I sat on the floor beside Milo's crib, watched his tiny chest rise and fall, and knew that I'd finally done something right. It only took 2 weeks for the calls to stop, though the silence they left behind was louder than anything they ever said to my face. My mother sent one more letter, handwritten, flowery, filled with crossed-out words and guilt-laced phrases like, "We didn't mean it," and "It was just a bad night," and "Family is supposed to forgive." But I returned it unopened, knowing it would only make me second-guess what I already knew to be right. That chapter had closed, and no apology offered only after the money stopped flowing would ever feel like something I could trust again. I thought I'd feel freer, lighter, maybe even proud of myself. But instead I just felt tired, so deeply, bone-crushingly tired that even sleep didn't do much to fix it. Cutting them off wasn't cathartic. It was a necessary surgery, and necessary things still leave you raw. I woke up every morning wondering if it would be the day I regretted drawing that hard line. But then I'd walk into Milo's room and see him smiling in his sleep, one hand curled into a tiny fist by his cheek, and all the doubt would evaporate before I even turned the light on. He was growing so fast it was almost alarming. His legs suddenly too long for the onesies that used to bunch around his ankles, his laugh fuller, his little words beginning to take shape like soft pieces of clay he was still figuring out how to mold. He'd call me Mama in the sweetest, roundest voice that could turn every awful thing I'd ever endured into background noise. His first steps came on a Monday, and I caught them on camera by accident while recording a video message for an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. One minute he was wobbling beside the couch, and the next he was toddling straight toward me like he'd known how to do it all along. Work was steady. Not easy, but steady. I returned to Monroe after 6 months away and was immediately met with a desk full of congratulatory cards, an inbox that looked like it had been through war, and a promotion offer that felt surreal, even as I shook Richard's hand and accepted. I was now heading up an entire division, strategy and growth, something I used to daydream about back when I still thought I'd never even want a family, back when the idea of a child felt like something designed to slow you down instead of sharpen your focus. I arranged a new schedule, 3 days in the office, 2 from home, and hired Margot full-time, my quiet, unflappable nanny who had once worked for a CEO and now sang lullabies like she'd invented them. She adored Milo, and he loved her more than he loved peas, which said a lot. I didn't ask her to cook or clean or do anything outside her scope, and yet every Friday afternoon I'd come home to folded laundry and the faint smell of vanilla in the air. She said she did it because I know how hard it is, and I believed her. She was the first person in a long time who offered help without a price tag attached to it. That's not to say the loneliness didn't creep in, especially at night, when the apartment felt too big and Milo was finally asleep and the world outside was humming with lives I wasn't part of. Sometimes I scrolled through old photos and wondered how I used to fill these hours before him. How I ever found comfort in silence that didn't include the rhythm of his breath coming through the baby monitor. Other times, I found myself wondering about Cole, the man whose name my son would never know, and whether he'd feel anything if he saw our boy running across the living room floor, clutching a stuffed giraffe like it was treasure. But those thoughts passed, mostly. They passed because they had to. 6 months after cutting off my family, I ran into Brielle by accident in the frozen section of a downtown grocery store. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, the kind of thing she did when she wanted people to assume she'd just come from somewhere glamorous instead of hiding from awkward social encounters. I had Milo with me, bundled in his puffy jacket, face smudged with cracker crumbs, cheeks red from the cold. She looked at him, then at me, and smiled like we hadn't gone nuclear the last time we spoke. "Hey," she said, with that breathy voice she always used when trying to sound innocent. "Wow, he's getting big." I nodded, too tired to pretend we were still sisters in anything but blood. "How's the wedding planning?" I asked flatly, though I already knew it had been postponed indefinitely. "We're reevaluating," she said, her smile faltering. "Nate's been working overtime. I'm back at the agency part-time." I almost felt bad, until I remembered her calling Milo a burden and toasting to a world where he didn't exist. She didn't bring up money, which surprised me. She didn't ask about Sunday dinners, or offer to drop by, or mention Mom and Dad. She just looked at Milo once more, this time with something close to sadness, and walked off without saying goodbye. I didn't cry. I didn't replay it later. I didn't let it stain the rest of my afternoon. If anything, it confirmed what I'd already accepted. Some people won't change unless their comfort is stripped bare, and even then, not all of them will. I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep others warm, especially people who would never do the same for me. The next big shift came almost out of nowhere. On a Wednesday morning when I was still in leggings and a top knot, sipping coffee on my balcony while Milo napped. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, and, against my better judgment, I answered. The voice was shaky and hesitant, but unmistakably my father's. "Your mother broke her wrist," he said. "Slipped on the ice. She can't drive. I can't leave her alone all day." We didn't know who else to call. I didn't say anything at first, just listened to the wind on his end of the line. "I'm not asking for money," he added quickly. "Just maybe a ride to her follow-up appointment next week. It's at 11, if you're not busy." I looked down at the planner in my lap. I had 2 back-to-back meetings scheduled that day, one of them with a senior partner from a client firm I'd been chasing for over a year. But I also remembered the way my mom used to braid my hair when I was sick, the way she'd sit beside my bed even after a fight, humming old songs from the radio. I remembered a time when things hadn't been so warped by expectations and financial favors disguised as affection. "I'll take her," I said, not warm, but not cold either. "But just this once." He didn't argue, just thanked me and hung up. A week later, I picked her up from the rehab center, her arm in a cast, her face more drawn than I remembered. She didn't say much during the drive, just looked out the window and occasionally reached across her lap like she was trying to adjust to a world that no longer operated the way it used to. When I pulled up in front of their house, she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry. For what we said. For what we did. I don't expect anything. I just want you to know." I nodded but said nothing. Not yet. Not until I believed it wasn't just about needing something again. Milo turned 3 the following month, and we had cupcakes in the park. Just the 2 of us and Margot, who brought bubbles and a homemade crown. We sat in the grass, frosting on our fingers, sun on our faces, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt still. Not suspended, not frozen in stress, but steady. Milo crawled into my lap after his 3rd juice box and said, "I love you, Mama. You're my best friend." And maybe that was all I ever needed to hear. Some endings don't feel like an explosion or a clean break. They just stop asking to be carried. And eventually, you stop reaching for them in the dark. That's how it felt with my family. Like they'd turned into a house I used to live in, and one day I just stopped driving by to check if the lights were still on. They didn't try again after that appointment. Not really. A few polite texts, a forwarded article about toddlers and language development, a vague birthday card signed without warmth. I didn't block them. I didn't respond, either. I didn't need to explain anymore why I wouldn't shrink myself back down into the version of me they liked better, generous without limits, quiet when dismissed, the kind of person who confused love with approval. Milo was growing fast, all long limbs and nonstop questions, asking about everything from clouds to garbage trucks, and I poured myself into being the kind of mother he wouldn't have to unlearn later. The kind who showed up, who said no when it mattered, who didn't disappear behind silence or obligations. Work kept rising, higher titles, better clients, new offices with longer windows, but it didn't matter the way it used to. I took longer lunches, turned down meetings that overlapped with Milo's preschool pickup, started saying no to things that didn't serve the life I was actually living instead of the one I used to dream about. Success wasn't the title or the money anymore. It was the small, sweet moments that didn't need to be earned to matter. Sometimes I wondered if Cole would ever know he had a son with green eyes and a laugh that filled an entire room. Sometimes I thought maybe I'd write a letter I never sent, just to say thank you. For being kind, for making me feel alive, for unknowingly giving me the only person who ever taught me what it meant to love without needing to be rescued. But I didn't write it. Some stories are complete without a sequel. One evening, Milo and I sat on our balcony, watching planes blink across the sky, and he asked, "Mama, is this what forever feels like?" I wrapped a blanket around us both, kissed his forehead, and said, "If it's not, it's close enough." And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't need more than that.